And we're here with more from Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, who has the cover in this month's magazine on the Obama Doctrine. Jeffrey, let's start with the famous Godfather quote that you read to the president. Just when I thought Michael Corleone,
just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. I had said this to the president and mentioned this Godfather scene, and he finished the quote.
Yeah.
We were talking about the Middle East, obviously, and his whole desire for the last 7 years is to disengage as much as humanly possible from the Middle East and its problems, because there's no upside to them, and do other things. But his presidency is in part determined by what happens in the Middle East, just as so many presidencies before his.
What do you think pulls him back in? Is it the fear about terrorism in the United States? Is it pressure from allies? Is it genuine concern about destabilization that might lead to a nuclear Iran misbehaving? What pulls on him?
Let me break it down in a simple way as possible. There are 3 exports from the Middle East right now that matter: oil, terrorism, and refugees. Except the oil doesn't really matter as much as it used to be. This is why we can disengage, because we're becoming energy independent. But terrorism is the main problem. You know, if you don't control it there, this is the theory, then it's going to come here. We've been through that before, obviously. And now refugees is a huge issue because it's threatening the stability of Europe, which is the stable platform from which we do many of the things that we do as a country. You know, and those are our allies. So you can't get out. You really can't get out. But what his theory is that you can limit your exposure. You know, and the thing that he doesn't say in this story for obvious reasons, but I have intuited, is that every day that goes by that an American soldier is not killed in an unwinnable Middle East conflict is a victory for the United States, and a personal victory for him.
Right. On the terrorism question and the exportation of it and how much of a threat it is, in private, he's talking to his aides, he says things about, it suggests it's not really as much of a threat as people say.
Look, first of all, he's a coolly rational guy, right? And he understands that terrorism is designed to terrorize. That's the goal. And so if you don't allow yourself to be terrorized, the terrorists can't win. But people are people, and you know this is the argument that goes on inside the administration. People have said in so many words, you know, you before you castigate the fearmongers, you have to address the legitimate sources of fear. And so this is the Spockian quality of Barack Obama, which is, you know, to look and say more people are killed in school shootings and in bathtub accidents and in car accidents than are killed in terrorism. So we need to put this in focus, and we need to have resilience in our society. But people do need comfort, and so he's trying to work on that piece of it as well.
The criticism in those instances of him is he doesn't see the problem clearly if he doesn't understand the threat from terrorism. And yet what you're describing is he sees it, he just sees it a totally different way. Well, but he's considered it rather thoroughly.
He's considered it, and he understands it to be a non-existential threat to the United States. And unless, of course, they get chemical or nuclear or biological weapons, God forbid, and he understands that that's a different scenario, but that's one of the things he's working on. No, one of the things I learned in this recent round of interviews is that I think he has a pretty exact understanding of what's going on in the world, and he understands a couple of things about the Middle East and about Islam. One is that you can't fix it. You can't fix these problems as an American president in the time that he's been allotted to be president. So, you know, is this fatalism? It's probably a little bit of fatalism. It's also realism. And so he doesn't want to invest that much time. And, you know, the other thing he understands is that it actually, when you weigh varying threats around the world, the rise of China, Vladimir Putin's adventurism, climate change, his most controversial assertion, right? That climate change is an existential threat and terrorism isn't. He has, in a kind of cold-eyed, rational manner, made a list of things that are important, and terrorism is very much up there. I mean, I don't want to mislead. Terrorism is very, very much up there. Oh, there's a short-term and medium-term threat, but he thinks that the United States is capable of managing it, and that's the deal. And the way you manage it is not to panic.
The Batman metaphor that ISIS is the Joker, how does that work?
I actually think it's a brilliant metaphor, and it actually goes against this understanding of Obama that he wasn't taking ISIS seriously. He has said privately for the last couple of years that Gotham, you remember from the Batman movies, Gotham is divided by different gangs. Divided up, and these are unpleasant thugs, but there's a kind of order to the way that the gangs have divided up Gotham. Then comes the Joker, and he lights the whole city on fire. So who does Batman? And Obama did not extend the metaphor out to name himself as Batman, obviously. But who does Batman have to fight first? You fight the guy who's the agent of total chaos. Right. And this, by the way, it goes to a pretty cynical understanding about the Middle East. I don't think the president looks at the Middle East anymore and sees good guys and bad guys. He sees not so good guys, pretty bad guys, very awful people. You know what I mean? But I don't think he looks at Asia like a land of opportunity. Land of challenges, but land of opportunity. He just looks at the Middle East as a place of problems.
As you mentioned, every day there's a soldier that's not killed is a win for him. But give us a complete understanding of his use of other kinds of military force and his facility with or reluctance to use that kind of other force.
Look, one of the central ironies of this presidency is that many of his opponents think of him as a kind of sandal-wearing, Hyde Park law professor, civil liberties, fixated on civil liberties. He is those things to some degree. He's also the greatest terrorist hunter in the history of the presidency. He has ordered the killing of terrorists in 8 different countries, and there's a constant pace. One of the unrealities of the debate we're in now about his legacy that manifests itself in Republican discussion of this is that we're not fighting ISIS. He's at war with ISIS in Syria and Iraq. We're fighting ISIS. We're fighting it from the air, fighting it on the ground. And so there is this, only the far left understands this record because they're critical of Obama's use of drones, of use of special forces, of violating the sovereignty of other states in order to kill terrorists. But again, this goes to his cold-eyed rationalism about the way the world is organized. That these are people, I'm convinced, or he what he says to himself is, I'm sufficiently convinced that these people, if I don't kill them, will try to kill Americans. My number one job as President of the United States, my number one responsibility is to keep Americans alive, so I'm going to go kill them. And I don't think he gives it too much thought. There's not too much anguish there about this.
Yeah. Last question on Russia.
Yeah.
During the last presidential campaign, he made a lot of fun of Mitt Romney and Mitt Romney's misunderstanding about the Russian threat. What does he think about his own misperception, or is this something where he thinks, I had it all along?
He generally believes that he has it all along about most things. He's a man with a great deal of self-confidence, and that's why he can think about Syria the way he does and think about these other problems. I asked, I repeatedly asked him, rank threats. It's a journalistic weakness. You just give me the rank, and he steadfastly refused to rank threats. But I began to understand what he sees as serious, and he really does see Vladimir Putin and Russia as a declining leader, a short-sighted, brutish leader of a declining power. And so he doesn't see his biggest insult. This is a very elegant way of insulting Russia, but the biggest insult he has leveled against Russia is that it's a, quote, regional power. Vladimir Putin does not want to hear that he's a regional power. Yeah. He sees China's rise, managing that and dealing with the fallout from that as a much bigger national security problem for the United States than Vladimir Putin. All that said, there are tough questions to be asked about whether he kept his eye on Vladimir Putin's adventurism and whether or not Vladimir Putin is actually being effective in Syria. Those are serious questions that are worth asking, but he doesn't have many regrets, it seems to me, about kind of suggesting that Vladimir Putin is a third-tier dictator and not something that you have to worry about.
I lied. One more last question.
Yeah, sure.
George W. Bush used to say when he'd give a joint address to Congress and he'd see Nancy Pelosi get a little irritated by something he was saying, he'd lean into it a little more. He kind of liked riling his detractors. Right. Do you get the sense with Barack Obama that on Russia, where his position is not the consensus public position, on ISIS, where it's not the consensus public position, that he delights in not only his own ego, but also just delights in pushing back against the conventional view?
A, yes, because he's a politician and he's a competitive guy. B, he's a guy who thinks about what people are going to think of him 20 years from now. And he thinks he's right in his judgments. And he thinks that in the fullness of time, people will say, the Iran deal, that was smart. Opening Cuba, that was smart. Talking about climate change the way you're doing, that was smart. And so he does lean. But I also think that he's at the moment in his presidency, in the last year of his presidency. I'll give you one quick example. So, I said, how do you, going back to this idea of ranking, I said, climate change and ISIS. You seem to think that climate change is more important than ISIS. And I was giving him the opening. And I saw him for a moment sort of contemplate, okay, I'm on the record, how far do I go? And then I saw this flash in his eyes, and he's like, you know what? I'm just going to say what's on my mind. And he said, ISIS does not pose an existential threat to the United States. Climate change poses an existential threat to everyone if we don't deal with it. And he knows what he's saying. He knows that that's a red cape in front of the Republicans. But he's of the opinion, I think, that he's going to tell the people the truth. And over time, they'll understand that it's the truth. And I think as we move toward the end of this year, it's going to get more and more blunt, the talk from him,
Yeah, he's been storing all those red capes. He's getting ready to bring them out now that
he's got a box full of red capes.
Right.
Yes, he does.
All right, Jeffrey, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks.